Greetings. My name is Pastor Keith, and I'm thankful that you joined us for this Bible study. We are actually, this is the first Sunday of 2022, and I'm thankful that you've joined us. If you're watching live, I apologize for running a little bit behind. We've had some pretty traumatic things happening in the last few days, and for those of you that may not know, we are this week and next week going to be postponing our in-person services due to the COVID being higher than it has been in the past. The trustees have all met and agreed that they would like to consider that for these next couple of weeks, and so we're just going to continue to do our online Bible study as we have been. Today is going to be a little bit different than what we've normally done. We finished the series, the Kingdom of God series, and at least for now, and we finished, talking about the life of Jesus as seen through the eyes of the Gospels, the Gospel writers, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we're going to be looking at some other things coming up, which I'll tell you next week. But I wanted to really just take some time to stop and reflect about some things. We've had a lot to think about in the last few weeks. This Christmas for us was really, really different. As many of you know, my father-in-law passed away. Joy's dad passed away. Abigail's grandfather. And so this Christmas was quite different. And it is not uncommon that this year has been a strange Christmas for many of us, without any kind of a doubt. I've heard story after story, even within my own family. I don't think any of us have had what we call a normal Christmas. We've had other deaths in the family. We've had people suffering with COVID, and so this has been, without a doubt, a very, very tough year for many of us. And when we stop to think about the political climate, when we stop to think about the hostilities and things that we see going on in our world, it could possibly, be very discouraging to think about all of those things. Within this past year, a little over a year ago was when my mother passed away, and my father-in-law just recently passing away, and a few other people have just recently passed away, some dear friends and some loved ones, and it really causes you to stop and really think about life. And there is a sense that as we are living in this world, there is a longing that we have, that we want life to continue. We want there to be some kind of hope for us. I remember listening to a podcast where a particular fellow was, he was not a follower of Christ or not a believer in, they didn't believe that there was anything like a God, but I remember him talking about the idea, they were having a conversation about cryogenics, about the ability to freeze people, and the idea or the hope behind that, is that you can preserve a person's body, and then maybe they have some kind of illness, so you freeze them, and then all of a sudden, 20 years later, 100 years later, they find a cure, and they go, hey, we can go back and unfreeze this guy and cure him. And so there's kind of hope in that. And he said, there was I have a 5% increase in hope that there's something good for me down in the future. We're constantly trying to do things to renew ourselves, to make ourselves feel younger, right? I mean, we look and we see a baby, and you know, they're all soft, and the skin is soft, and they're growing, and they're developing, and there's that sense of newness and freshness, right? And but what happens, right? We start getting in our 20s, and our body starts going the opposite direction, and now all of a sudden we start worrying about things that we didn't worry about before. Oh, my eyes don't look the right color, so we want to put makeup on to make them look the right color. Or oh, my shirt doesn't fit like it used to, so what am I going to do? I'm going to kind of go on some kind of diet or exercise routine, and we're gonna try to create and make our body new again, right? There's this constant battle. It's almost like an upward battle. We're constantly fighting against it. But we're constantly trying to make ourselves new, right? If you look at the health and drug industry, or even just take the supplement industry, people spend billions and billions of dollars a year on health supplements. I'm right there in it, right? I've bought health supplements. I don't think any of us have not. Why? Because we want to make our lives longer. We want to extend our lives. We want that hope that there's something more. And so there's this idea that we realize that in this life that there's a constant decay. If you look at even down to the microscopic level, DNA is constantly devolving, right? If you, I know this might throw a wrench into some conversations, but if you've studied with me at all in the past, you know that I believe that the earth was created in 6 days, and that God literally created it, and that, you know, if you look at evolution, and evolution is supposed to be the evolving or the developing of new information, when science actually demonstrates it's a constant breaking down. And the scientists in some cases have demonstrated that we only have a limited number of generations that the human race can even exist. Why? Because everything is constantly breaking down. It's breaking down on a molecular level. It's breaking down in so many different ways. Think about even relationships. You get into relationships. If you don't work to maintain them, they break down. When we think about buying a house, right? It's all exciting. Maybe it's all brand new, maybe, right? But what happens? The faucet breaks. You got to replace the faucet, or walls start to crumble. Things begin to happen, and there's this constant trying to keep up with things, right? There's one podcast that I listened to a few episodes of it, but not too much. But it was called Money Pit, and basically it was all about do-it-yourself projects, and you could constantly be pouring money into your house, and it constantly decays. I remember when we lived up north, and we had a neighbor who was excruciatingly meticulous about his lawn and about pruning his trees and landscaping his yard. And don't get me wrong, he had one of the best looking yards in the neighborhood, but it was a lot of work. Well, he's passed away, and guess what's happened to his yard? It's all decayed. You can't. There's no evidence of that once happened. What happens when we, I drive down. You can drive down the road here, and you can see. You can drive down and see some of the old freeways that used to be in existence, or while they're still there. But what happens? They're starting to break down. And you see some roads, in some cases, the plants start taking over, and pretty soon start breaking up the pavement. And so this whole idea, when we think about decay, we think about life, and we think about things, that there is this constant process. And it just seems like this last year, 2021, and the previous year, 2022, with the worldwide pandemic, have really shaken up the foundations of a lot of things for all of us. And when we stop to think about 2022, we like to think about the idea that, wow, it's a new year. things are going to be really great, and things are, you know, we want to hope for the best. Of course we do. But in reality, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know the things that are going to happen in the future. We don't know if the plague. Well, like I said just a minute ago, right? We've right now the COVID rate in our city is 3 times higher than it was last year at this time. You know, we just don't know what's going to happen. And as we have, some of you have even lost people to COVID, so we know it's a real thing. That's not a real thing. And so there can be a temptation for us to have a lot of anxiety about the future and about what's going to happen. And so that's why I wanted to take a moment to think, as we think about this next year, what are we going to face? And as followers of Christ, we're going to pause for just a moment, if you would, just as followers of Christ, sometimes it means, even more so, it means that there's going to be opportunities for persecution and opportunities for difficulties that come ahead. And excuse me for just one moment, as we think about the future, what does it hold? What does it mean for us? And there was a time, as Christianity was beginning to flourish, back in the very beginning, the truth about Jesus Christ, the power of his resurrection, the forgiveness that he had given to people, so radically changed people's lives that it radically changed the culture that was around them. Christians were doing things like saving babies that were being offered to sacrifices, or saving babies that were, people said, oh, there's a defect, just get rid of that baby, and Christians were taking them and raising them, and they were giving sacrificially, helping each other and helping people in the community. And it was such a radical thing, and it went so much against the Roman pagan culture, and it began to cause issues. And so Christians obviously began to be persecuted, and so what would happen is they'd be thrown into the lion's den and forced, you know, to come face to face with hungry lions who were deliberately starved so that they would, you know, rip these Christians apart. And God at that time revealed something and gave them a glimpse of hope. And that was in part through the revelation that he gave to John, his closest disciple. He took him up into heaven, and he gave him that a vision. And part of that vision was about what was going to happen, about the new. And so I just want to take a few moments to look in Revelation chapter 21, looking at verses 1 through 8, and thinking about the future. So John said this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." You see, when we think about the idea of new, the New Testament, or the Greek, has two ideas that are carried with the idea of new. One is something that is like new, like it's just fresh, like a newborn baby, right? Baby is just born, he's only, maybe a few hours, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few minutes, right? Maybe a few months old, right? But the idea is new, it hasn't been around long. But the other idea that's carried along with that is that has to do, that's often translated new, is the idea of quality. And when we associate newness. We often, in our thinking, we associate that newness with the idea of something that's very brief, right? That's been around. Like, hey, what happens? Like, I'm going to go get a new car, and we get excited about the new car, right? Well, what happens after 5 or 6 or 10 years? The newness wears off. We're not excited about the car the same way that we were before. It's like that with a lot of things. We constantly want to buy new furniture, or we want to buy new clothes because we want a new look, because we're tired of the old look. And of course, that's also propagated by our media. It's propagated by the advertising industry and all that kind of stuff. But we've created, especially very much in our culture, this idea of this constant renewal process, this constant idea of making things new. And so we have to get something new because the old one wears off and loses its quality, right? You get a house, and over time it loses some of its quality, and you have to keep repairing it, and there's more work that goes into, like we talked about earlier. But in the concept, when we think about this, in God's culture and in God's economy, it's different. The idea of newness is that God actually takes what has been around a while, and He actually makes it even better. So there's the quality of things that gets better as it lengthens, you see. And part of the problem, why is it we have in our society or in our world, why is there this decay? It's because of the sin that man has. And what the Bible teaches us is that this sin, our sin, affects all of creation. And the Bible even teaches that the creation is groaning even now. And but there's coming a time when there's going to be a completely new heaven and a new earth. And what John is trying to teach here, what God has revealed through John to those who were living in that time, and to those who were about to be. Remember, a lot of these people who first read this were those who were going to be persecuted. And this was going to be a book of hope for them. It was going to be a vision for something that was going to come, that was going to be able to give them a sense of encouragement and strength, so that when they're standing in front of hungry lions, they know that there's something good that's coming. So he's saying, I saw this new heaven and this new earth. In other words, there's coming a place that's going to be even better. He says, I also saw a holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming out of heaven, from God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. There is an intentionality. Now we're just doing a quick overview of this passage. There's a lot that could be said about this passage. There is no way that we could cover it in this short little Bible study, or this little sermon, or little time in the Word, or whatever we would call it. There's no way we could cover everything in here. We're only looking at verses 1 through 8. But I want to look at it from the context of, as we're thinking about what's coming. You see, as we have just lost people who are precious to us, as you probably lost people who are precious to you, there's no hope, or there's no guarantee for the rest of us that this year is going to hold something even, glorious, or, that somebody else is not going to pass away, or we just don't know these things. But what we have is a hope, something that we're looking forward to. And so he's saying there's an intentionality when John saw this new Jerusalem. What does Jerusalem represent? Well, to the Jewish reader, it was plainly obvious, right? Because Jerusalem was the center, or the place where the temple was. And so this was like representative of the place where God would be dwelling with His people. Jerusalem was the holy city. It was the Mount Zion. It was the place where people would come for a Passover feast at the year. It was that holy city. And what we see is now that old city of Jerusalem is now new. And look at how he talks about it. This is not just like a new city, but it is prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. Like, there is some serious intentionality going on. God has been doing some work on this new city, and it is precious for him. And then look at verse 3. He said, "Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them." Listen, what we have to understand is this is huge. If you're watching this, and you might be watching this as a skeptic, and I appreciate that you've stayed with me this long, and maybe there's a lot of questions that you might have, and that's fine. Maybe there's some mocking going on up to this point. Listen, that's fine. I understand. It's not a problem. But what I want to understand, what I'm hoping for us to understand is that when we look around in this world and we see this sin, this chaos, what we've got to realize is that God is a holy God. And we've talked about this several times in the past, and we'll continue to talk about it because that's an important part of who he is. And the idea that God has prepared a people. He has taken people who were sinful. He has taken people who were ugly. He has taken people who were beaten and beaten and battered and bruised. And he's healed them, and he's brought people to himself. And now, look what's going to happen. He is going to live among men. That is what God intended always from the beginning. When he created Adam and Eve and put them in the garden, his desire was always to be with them, to have that kind of relationship with us. But we were the ones that turned away. We were the ones that didn't pay any attention to it. And so now it says, but see, if you look at this now, it says he's going to make his humanity live with them. And look at this. They will be his people. And God himself will be with them and will be their God. This deliberate intentionality that what God has been doing all along has been preparing for this moment. Listen, the new earth is good. The new heavens is good. The new city of Jerusalem is good, and it's all glorious. But that's a byproduct of what God is going to do. He's going to always do good things because by nature, that's who he is. He is a good God. But what he has done, the miracle, is this very thing that we've looked at in verse 3. Is that now God is going to be able to live among people who are not sinful. You see, these old bodies that we have, they're going to be cast away. Listen, I know I watched as I watched the body of my father-in-law in the casket, and we were standing there looking and thinking about it and realizing he's gone here. He's gone from this earth. But he's exactly where he has always planned to be. He's in a better place. But it's not just a better place. He's with a better person. He's with his Lord. He's with the God of all glory. And that's what it means for us as believers. What God did was took a sinful person. He took all of us who are sinners. And he's changing us our heart. He's making us pure and bringing us to a place where we're going to be with him. And listen, he's going to be our God. Just as much as he's going to be. And we're going to be his people. We're going to love him. We're going to adore him. And we're going to be in these new bodies. And the sinful things are no longer going to even be a desire for us. Because right now, right now on this earth, we struggle. We struggle with the things that our bodies deal with, right? The struggle with the sins in our body. But Christ is making us new, even now, as we're growing in him, as we're growing to love his word more. He's changing us, and he's preparing us so that when we get into this new body, we're going to be able to love God purely and wholly, and not have any. We're not going to have to worry about the corruption of our heart getting in the way. That's the miracle of this whole thing, and that's what John is pointing to here. And he goes on in verse 4, he says, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Can you imagine that? It's particularly real for many of us right now. We've just had, like I said, several people pass away in this last year. But you imagine living in a place where people that you know and love are never going to die? And he goes on, grief, crying, and pain will be no more. Why? Because the previous things have passed away. All of this junk that's here. And imagine what this message meant to those Christians who were standing in that lion's den in a coliseum, looking at those hungry lions who were about to pounce on them. They knew that they were about to be ripped apart limb per limb, limb by limb. But they know, you know what? I've got a hope. This is just a temporary carcass. There's something greater that we're living for. And it worked. It gave them hope. They were singing, you know, as they were being marched into the lion's den, they were singing hymns and songs and praising God, even though they knew that they were about to die. Because they knew how much their God loved them. And they had read and seen and understood the promise of the Lord, that he was going to make all things new. In verse 5 it says, then the one seated on the throne said, look, I am making everything new. It's not just a new heaven. It's not just a new earth. It's not just a new Jerusalem. I am making everything new. All of creation that once was mourning now is going to be returned, and there's going to be rejoicing. Creation is going to be set back into place, and it's going to be now, instead of decaying, things are going to get better. Things are going to grow and flourish and nourish as God has always intended it to be. And then he says this. He also said, right, because these words are faithful and true. Why would God say that? He wants John to include these words because he's saying, listen, as I have said this, this is going to happen. And when we stop to look at the things that are in the world, listen, especially if you're looking at things from a political standpoint, if you're looking at governments, if you're looking at institutions or businesses or things to save our life, to save and give us hope, those are going to only provide a limited amount of hope. And what God here is saying is that it's faithful and true. What I have told you is going to happen. What I have showed you about making everything new, it is going to happen. God is going to do this. And listen, part of that proof is this. Part of that is that people like my father-in-law, Bob Davis, whose life was touched by Jesus Christ. Was he a perfect man? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. Am I a perfect man? No. I mean, worse than he was. Here's the thing, is that we have all been made perfect in Christ. Our position before God has been made perfect. And he is making us new even in this life. And here's the proof. The proof is that we love his word more. It's that we're growing in him more. We haven't willed it upon ourselves to love him more. He's forgiven us. And as a result, we've grown to love him more because he continues to work in us. And so these words are faithful and true. He's changing us now, and we can know that he is going to make everything new. He says, and then he says, this is what he said to me. It is done. It's done. Everything, what God has intended, it's done. And it's as if it's already been done. When God says it, it's the same as being done. We may not be witnesses of that, right? When he told Abraham, for example, that he was going to make him the father of many nations, we know what the scripture teaches us is that he died before he saw that promise fulfilled. But you know what? It's already done. It was already done. Because God said it, it was as if it was already done. And he died believing God. And that's what God is doing with us right now. He's creating us and bringing us to a place where we believe him, even if we haven't even seen it. It's done. And he says, look at what he says. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Now, if you're familiar with the Greek alphabet, that's just the first and the last letter of the alphabet. And he clarifies that, right? He says, I am the beginning and the end. In other words, I started life, I created this world, and I've been here all through it, and I'm going to be here at the end. And it doesn't matter what we've conjured up in our mind as being truth. The truth is that he was there at the beginning, he will be there at the beginning, and he's in control, and he's doing everything right now to build and to bring us to this point. He is the beginning and the end. And anything else that we try to hold on to in the middle is going to be wavery ground. In my mind, and it's probably not really a really good illustration, but I always I always thought I would love to try a zip line, right? And I remember watching a show where there were these kids that had a long journey to go to school, and part of that journey was through a long valley that was, full of all kinds of obstacles and things like that, and somebody had come along and rigged a zip line actually that went right across the valley, so they saved tons amount of time, and I thought about that, like if you grab that zip line and you stay on that zip line, as long as you don't let go of the zip line, it will carry you all the way to the end. And that's, I think, what God is trying to say here. I am the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and end. Look, cling to me and to my truth. Life may get ugly. You may travel through the valley and you may hit some trees, and but as long as you hold on to me and to the truth of who I am, you're going to get to the end, right? And so that's why he says, I will freely give to the thirsty from the spring of the water of life, right? So that's what he's saying there, is that, that whole idea that we're talking about is that he is the source of life. He's the one that originated life. He's the one that created life. And remember when we talked about, if you went through us with the study through God's Word and who Jesus and his encounters, you remember the woman at the well. And he told her, he said, listen, if you drink of what I give you, it will spring up in you a well of everlasting life. We don't have to try to work for it. He just gives it to us. You see, the one who conquers, in verse 7, the one who conquers will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. That's his promise to the one who conquers. And how do we conquer? By trusting in him. There's no other way. We cannot will ourselves into being a Christian. We cannot will ourselves into being a follower of Jesus Christ. Here's what a follower of Jesus Christ is. Someone who has recognized their brokenness and acknowledged it to God and accepts his forgiveness and falls deeply in love with him and that keeps happening in our lifetime. We'll keep growing closer and closer and closer to him. And that's how we conquer. We conquer through his love. And he goes on and he says definitively in verse 8, but the cowards, the faithless, detestable murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, they will share, their share will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Listen, a lot of people have this mistaken idea that hell is Satan's dominion. That he is all of a sudden going to, stand there with his pitchfork and say, okay, here, now you're in my kingdom. Y'all better whip yourselves in shape. It's not that. Hell is the place where he is going to go to suffer for all eternity, for all he is going to have to give an account for. And that's why he says, those who will not trust, those people, all of these people, cowards and the faithless and all that list that we just read, all of those are people who say, look, I want my way. They're not acknowledging their sin. They're not coming broken to the Lord. He's saying their share, in other words, your reward, is going to be in that lake that burns with fire and sulfur. And this is what he refers to as the second death. What is the second death? maybe it would help if we explain it this way. If you go back to the beginning and we understand that what God taught us in His Word, that He created Adam and Eve, and He told them, He said, I've given you everything. But He said, do not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or you're going to die. Okay? So they ate. Did they die? If you read the book, they didn't die. As a matter of fact, they lived hundreds of years. So what did God mean by death? You see, we look at death and we associate it with the physical death. But death in the scripture means so much more than just the physical body dying. The essence of what death means is to be separated from the source of life. Do you understand what I'm saying? The essence of death is to be separated from the source of life. When Adam and Eve chose to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they chose to separate themselves from the source of life, who was God. They chose to separate their trust and not put their trust in His Word, to not put their trust in Him. And they chose their own way. And that's what we are all doing. We are all like sheep, like idiots, going our own way, not recognizing that there is a way that's better and a way that's good. That is death. That is a spiritual death. But there is also the physical death, right? But He's talking here about the second death, and that second death is what? Forever being separated from God. Not ever having that chance to hear the good news, to hear the message of that Jesus came and died on a cross for us. That's horrible. To be trapped in a forever cycle of never experiencing any hope, or never even knowing that there's going to be any hope. Listen, as we're thinking about 2022 coming, there's probably a lot of anxiety that is going to be in the minds and hearts of many people, perhaps even in yourself. But if we understand what God is really doing, we understand the real hope that is coming. It changes our whole perspective, and it gives us a courage to be able to face the lions. Maybe most of us are probably not going to face physical lions, but listen, we have to understand this, that even if the world goes in a direction that we don't want it to go, even if persecution rises up for followers of Jesus Christ, we have to realize that there is a hope that's coming. And this is the hope that we can stand upon. This is why we can be in the midst of suffering and say, I have a greater hope. Yeah, I mean, of course, we don't want to lay there and not be able to breathe, or we don't want to struggle with those. So we don't want to have to go through that if we don't have to. We don't want to have horrible things happen to us. That would be weird if we wanted stuff like that to happen. But we know that when we go through difficult times, we have this promise that God is going to make all things new. And that, listen, no matter what the 2022 brings, and I'm wishing and praying that it brings the most and the best for you, but listen, it's not going to bring what God is going to bring when He creates the New Jerusalem, when He creates the new heavens and the new earth, when He creates all things new. Everything that we experience in the year 2022 will pale in comparison. And so as we think about this coming year, think about this. This is our hope. This is where we are living. This is why we can live and go through difficult and trying times. And why we can let go of the things here and know, because we have a God who is able to take care of things, and we can move on, and we can live with this hope that all things are going to be created new. So as we think about, the new year, right? Every year we say happy what? New Year. And every year, we go and start our membership at the gym, and we start our new list of resolutions, or we start our new goal list, or things like that. And we hope that it's going to usher in something good and something new. But I want to encourage you in this. Don't let that be your source of hope. Because whatever we do is going to ultimately end in decay. I'm not saying don't set goals. I'm not saying, don't, make some changes and things in your life for this year. But what I'm saying is because we're going to do that. We're all going to do those things. That's part of how life goes. But listen, our ultimate hope, and that ultimate hope of newness, lies completely in something that we cannot even do anything about. It relies completely upon the work that God has done through His Son, Jesus Christ. And that's my prayer for you. Would you bow in prayer with me this morning? Lord, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity, Lord, to be refreshed by your word, to be reminded about what is new. And I want to ask that, Father, would you kindle in my heart a depth of love and a depth of understanding, Lord, of what is to come. And Lord, is my desire as we think about the year 2022, that our passion and our desire is not, Lord, that we come up with some new self-improvement program, or not that we try to, make our church better, or not that we try to do things, but Father, that our hope, Lord, begins to shift into something really that we don't even have any control over. Lord, that you're going to make everything new, so that now you are going to put us in a world where we're not surrounded by decay. We're not going to be living, Lord, in bodies that are going to be falling apart and broken. We're not going to have to wear bags to pee in. We're not going to have chemotherapy. We're not going to have operations. We're not going to have CPAP machines or ventilators or hospitals, Father. Because we're going to be in a world where there is no death. We're going to be in a world where we're constantly connected with you, the source of life. And Father, I'm praying for this miracle. Lord, that you continue to work to change me, Father. I know that there's a lot of things in my life, Father, that I still hold back, and I pray and ask your forgiveness. And increase my love for you and your word. And I pray that for all those who are listening this morning, that the year 2022, we get to the end of it, and we don't look back and go, oh, look at all the things I've accomplished. We get to the end of the year 2022, and we go, oh, I am passionately in love with my Jesus. It's His name we pray. Amen. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll keep you posted if we have our service next week. I'll definitely keep you posted that. I mean, not next week. We won't have it next week. It's canceled next week. But the following week, we'll keep you posted on what happens with that. And thank you again for joining us, and may God bless you, and may 2022 be the year that you fall desperately in love with